afternoon. But the first speaker, it's my great pleasure to introduce, is Mark Thompson, who runs the BBC. He's been Director General for the last few years. He's been in the BBC, in fact, for over 20 years, but took a brief interlude to run Channel 4, for which they forgave him, and then they invited him back. He has spearheaded many of the most radical digital initiatives that have been taking place in the BBC over the last 2 to 3 years, of which the most exciting he will tell us about, which is being unveiled really more or less as we speak, which is the whole of the release of the archive of all of the BBC material for the whole of the benefit of humankind. I'd like you to welcome him. Thank you very much.
So as you've heard, I'm a traditional broadcaster, and what we love more than anything else, as you know, is control. Control. I used to be a controller. I can have my slides up on the screen. So I press it there. How do you let go? I'm going to talk about the BBC, but I could be talking about any other big content player in this world. If you've grown up with control, how do you let go and let your content go to go and flourish out there in all the digital media? Okay, this is one way we look at the world. You won't be able to read all of this, but let me give you a flavor. Two curves, two rather different curves. First one, broadcast, linear narrative, begins with traditional broadcasting. Still got plenty of time to go. HD TV, Freeview, in some ways the iPlayer up there, BT Vision, the rest of it. Now, along this curve, we broadcasters have still got an awful lot of control. But look at the other curve, network media, non-linear, participatory. You can see some of the brands up there, YouTube, Bebo, Facebook, and all the rest of it. And how culturally and how in terms of the way you think about your content do you manage a world which has got bits of both? This is where we are. This is where we're heading from. BBC made quite a good fist of Web 1.0. There we are. This is March 2007. UK reach, number 3. Google and MSN above us. Pretty much everyone else, and certainly the other content players well below us. And other bits and bobs. AV. Haven't got as much AV as we'd like, but we're streaming quite a lot of it now. Radio. It's interesting. Radio spearhead for the BBC. One or two other broadcasters too. 40 million requests for on-demand radio programs per month now. 1.2 petabytes of data. If I knew what a petabyte was, I'd be even more impressed. I think it's a big number, I'm told. 46 million unique users outside the UK. But that second wave, much, much richer AV on the web, mobility, syndication of content, personalization, social networks, user engagement. That's about attitudes, again about personalization, about, particularly for an organization like the BBC, creativity. Okay, here's another way of looking at it. The scorecard so far, well, I've probably been actually a bit too generous, but there are quite a few categories where we've got a significant presence and where our kind of net promoter index, the number of people who use our stuff on the web and would recommend it strongly to others, is high. Entertainment, the subject of this afternoon's, I think you'd have to say quite a big question. We have 1 or 2 points, but it's quite interesting how much harder content players are finding it to really make entertainment live in some of these new areas than some of the other more informational-based genre. So this is one part of our answer, perhaps. This is the iPlayer. I think it's the first time we've given anyone a flavour of the look. Few weeks away yet, but this will be our on-demand application. Pretty small client, available to download for nothing on bbc.co.uk, and then the beginnings of opening up TV content and doing with TV what we've done with radio player. But I want to say that's only part of the story about BBC content. Here is on that rare bird, a content player who's got something nice to say about YouTube. Chad. BBC content is already being seen legally, illegally, in many different ways. And we're a content play. We don't set much store by any proprietary technology, nor do we Are we obsessive about any kind of walled garden? We want our content out there. And here you see a clip of Hustle on YouTube. We have a relationship with YouTube, a few weeks old now. We're very interested in finding lots of different ways of getting our content across the web. Though what I want to say is, we've got some thoughts about this. We're experimenting. We're trying to see what works and what doesn't work. We distinguish currently, and we'll see if this works, between short form and long form, with a sense that short form content, 2, 3, 4 minutes, basically get it out there. Let people use it. If we can get the rights correct, let's let people play with it. But let's also make sure that the long form experience, complete radio, TV program experience, is something where we're guaranteeing a higher level of quality, and if we can, environments where the branding is very clear. We see syndication and sharing of content as being really, really important. We want to be a living part of the web. We don't want to be an exclusive corner, which, you know, in the vain hope that you can get people in and they'll stay there. We know we need to work much more flexibly with our rights holders. Some rights we control very extensively, some we need to work with partners. We need to be true to the interests of rights holders, but we need to work with them to understand that in the end, opening the stuff up and letting people use it and play with it is the way, in my view at least, to succeed in this world. And finally, we showed you 46 unique users around the world. In my view, we're reaching 300–400 million people around the world, principally with TV and radio. We need to revolutionize what we're doing with our websites globally. We have significant amounts of content. The traditional barriers to broadcasters, typically you had to wholesale your content if you could to other broadcasters around the world. Those traditional barriers are collapsing, and there are fantastic markets open to the BBC and other content providers around the world. We need to think much, much more ambitiously about how we open those markets up. So what else? Well, not getting locked into TV, radio, the web. We've restructured the BBC to try and think much more fluidly about content. Here's one example. What kind of visual life does radio have? We believe that actually the visualization of radio and, if you like, the visual soundtrack to go with radio on fixed devices, on mobile devices, on TV, and so on, is going to be an important part of the future. Everyone here is going to talk about user creativity. I guess here we've got Mr. Friction from the Asian Network, unsigned bands. Here we've got people tagging themselves bits of our radio archive. You choose it, and the more you use it, the more you label, the more everyone can find. Getting the public themselves to help us index and highlight our archive. Opening up our own editorial processes. This is actually, I think, one of the most striking things that we're doing at the moment. BBC editors, there's Peter Barron from Newsnight, you've got Nick Robinson, our political editor, in real time talking about their broadcasting and starting off very lively blog discussions. Then there's entertainment. Here's Doctor Who. This is a site pretty much from today, maybe from back in April, trying to figure out, of course on demand, of course being able to run Rich AV complete episodes soon is going to help us. But I think one of our central challenges right now is how you take this world, particularly the world of the kind of pieces of entertainment that we do well, some of the Hollywood majors do well, high production value, built entertainment, and giving that a broader life across platforms, big challenge for us. And finally, from me, a few of the issues. And again, I've said these are BBC issues, but I would say for many other content players, and the ones I talk to, many of these knock about. Not one of them, public service commercial, I think is just the BBC, but the others, I think, apply much more widely. Pace. As I've said, we're a content play. We're not trying to deliver some new first mover, killer technology. That's not what we're there to do. But we need to move as quickly as we can. And that really gets aligned to culture. I've talked about trying to migrate from a world of control, we know best, we've got the masts on the hills, we can broadcast to you whether you like it or not, to a world which is much more interleaved with user responses, reactions, and so forth. What kind of organization can achieve that? And how do you migrate? How do you migrate the TV or radio commissioner to a point where they are genuinely not bolting on other media, other platforms as an afterthought, but really thinking about how you can unlock things? You'll be hearing from Peter Bazalgette shortly. I think Endemol have been very, very, very good at getting this thinking all the way upstream in terms of content development, and I think that's exciting. Branding, well, I think, to be honest, most of the big media organizations I talk to obsess almost too much about branding and have got a fantastically kind of defensive laser wall of kind of fears and expectations about branding. Needs to be thought about how you get a kind of watermark through what you do and get some visibility for what you do, not least because branding in the end, quite apart from whatever other attribute it's got in terms of driving revenue, is also in itself a form of navigation. For the BBC, quite big issues about our public service mission, those parts of what we do on all platforms which are part of what you get in the UK for your license fee, and what parts are properly monetized commercially. And finally, partnerships. I talked about wanting to be part of the web rather than a kind of little ivory tower inside the web. But I would say our experience in recent years is often it's when we've got partnerships with independent production companies making fantastic content for us, with other broadcasters, with other players in this space, with rights holders, that we can generate and leverage the maximum value out of our content. To me, the heart of the issue for content makers and providers in this space is how you focus on value, distinctive value, value you can bring, and value which is clear-cut enough that you can really market it and develop it and get it noticed in this space. And to what extent you can use partnerships and use the relationships and the kind of coalitions of talent to really build that. So I would say the test for success for the BBC is not the way you'd measure it, I think, or would have measured it 5, 10 years ago, where you'd have said, is the BBC launching lots of new digital services? Is the new real estate being chopped up, new brands, radio, TV channels with new numbers after them? It's going to be much more about whether you can build something more organic and something which is much more shared hopefully with many of the people in this room, than a more traditional picture of what a broadcaster does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mark, can I ask a question? I mean, it's interesting how you've made the journey, because you were a radio, TV only, then you moved online and became a global newspaper. In fact, one of the most well-respected and authoritative newspapers, one of the busiest websites in the world. And I know it's been all singing, all dancing for many years, but in fact, as we know, almost all the traffic has actually been people going there for your written content on that place.
Sure.
So then, having built a world-class newspaper, you're now going back to your broadcasting roots and becoming, hopefully, a major centre for broadcast. Can I ask a question about bandwidth, though? Because, I mean, if, let's say, an imaginary 10% of all TV viewing just in this country happens starting from, say, 2009, streaming from your website or Endemol's or someone else's, and what is your estimate about what that would do to the bandwidth utilization in this country? I mean, it'd be a lot, wouldn't it?
Well, firstly, on your general point, I mean, the way I think of the BBC is literally from the 20s, we've had a position in certain categories, in journalism, in information, in culture, in entertainment. And what the BBC's done over 80 years is use the technical means at its disposal to further that mission. So journalism began, and we kind of more or less invented journalism on the radio. With each successive technology, we've tried to adapt and develop what we do. But the basic idea, which is bringing people news of what's going on in the world when they want it, where they want it, begins in the 1920s. So in a way, I think means and ends, the ends haven't changed that much. The means are constantly evolving.
The newspaper was an absolute marvellous spin-off because you had all the editorial processes there. They were writing the stories to be read on radio and TV. They might just as well go online.
But what's happening now, in my view, is I mean, to come home to mother, really. I mean, the web is heading back towards moving picture and sound, which is what we understand best. Now we've made a good
issue there because I mean, you can do some calculations which produce some quite startling figures in terms of. We know, for instance, that just a 2-hour video conference is equivalent in bandwidth to me backing up 120 million average emails. So that's a video conference, not your quality. That's old-style video conference.
There's all sorts of extrapolations you can do. I mean, there are some people, as you know, who believe there's going to be a collision at the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, which is going to eat the entire universe.
But it is a serious point, isn't it?
No, well, look.
I mean, it's much more efficient to broadcast from one area
Let's start with the upside, which is that what the BBC and many other players are going to do, it seems to me, is drive a market for faster and faster speeds and more bandwidth for broadband in the UK. And that, I think, is a good thing. Can I guarantee that the kind of demand curve and the bandwidth supply curve are going to perfectly match each other over the next 5 or 10 years? No, I can't. But we're talking to the ISPs, talking to other players in this field, and we're going to try and be as intelligent and as thoughtful as we can as we discover what demand is. And we've got some controls on managing demand. But fundamentally, if you want a UK which is heading towards where other countries already are in terms of speed and bandwidth, I think developments like the iPlayer are good, not bad.
Well, I'll make a prediction, which is that I think that in 5 or 6 years' time, if this is successful, as I hope it is, and I expect that it will be, I think it will be extremely popular, this archive, I think we could find at least 25% of the entire country's bandwidth connected with your site and others related to it. Very interesting. I think that's quite an achievement. Can I ask you one other question, because we've got a couple more minutes? We're talking about community journalism and people using their mobile phones and capturing vivid moments. We heard about that this morning. Sure. I've been waiting for a day when I'll be able to, I don't know, walk past the scene of some incident, capture it on a video clip, and whack it straight through as a video clip to the BBC and know that I'll be paid my £200 or whatever if it's shown. I know
you can do that now. I mean, that's already available. And it's being used.
Paid?
Well, the answer is we sometimes pay. We don't always pay. We sometimes pay.
Right. But you can see where I'm going here, because if it was a paid thing, it's just absolutely clear. If that clip, you know what the number of phone it's come from, you know to whom that phone is registered. If that clip is absorbed into the BBC system, if it's shown on air, then there's a standard payment for each time it's screened. Then if you were to do it psychologically, you would be creating a contract with the British public saying where we feel it's appropriate to use that clip, you are recruited from this point on as our journalists at large.
But to be clear, many people in this country are very happy to uplink pictures and video without payment. I mean, the relationship we've got with the British public is a slightly different one, and it's, I mean, what's the best way of putting it? There's a touch of YouTube about the BBC.
Yes.
People like to phone the BBC. They like to give information. We've had a program for years called Crime Watch, where people try and solve crimes. They don't ask to be paid or to get rewards. They want to help. And so it's got, of course, if somebody's got an exclusive piece of very valuable video, we'll consider paying for it. But what's interesting is when we do different kinds of experiments, we did a fantastic experiment getting people to use their own PCs to help effectively with a very big calculation about global warming. Tens of thousands of people will, for nothing, engage with that because they want to take part. And in a way, the business about not paying is less about being incredibly mean, though I am incredibly mean. It's mainly about recognising we've got a slightly different relationship for many of the people who use the BBC.
I do understand that. Thank you very much, Mark. Okay. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best with this tremendous archive. Thank you.